madness ends here!
You cannot stop the storm!
There are very few names in history that have remained a mystery for thousands of years. A man who walked with God, a man who saw things no other human had ever witnessed, and then he simply vanished. No death, no grave, no trace left behind. The Bible mentions him only briefly, but an ancient, forbidden text holds his entire story. Today, we are uncovering the secret that has been hidden for centuries. Today, we are revealing the story of Enoch. In the book of Jude, Enoch is mentioned by name. But the question remains, if Enoch was so significant, why isn't his book part of the biblical canon? Scholars believe this text isn't just an ancient manuscript. It is a window into beliefs of the era surrounding the time of Jesus, a world filled with angels, demons, and the supernatural. Genesis 6 verses 1 to 5 reveals a reality that shocks every reader. Did the world really witness fallen angels who disobeyed God, descended to earth, and lusted after human women? What was the result of this union? The birth of hybrid giants, known to history as the Nephilim. And this was exactly the time when Enoch walked the earth. Enoch lived for 65 years and walked with God, and then he was no more, for God took him. Many believe Enoch is one of the two witnesses destined to return during the end times. Hebrews 9 verse 27 states that it is appointed for men to die once, yet Enoch's fate was different. Could Enoch and Elijah be the two witnesses foretold in Revelation 11? Today, we seek the answers to these mysteries. The world before the flood, the genesis of mystery. To truly understand the story of Enoch, we must first transport our minds back to a time that predates everything we know, a world that existed before the Great Flood. Imagine a civilization on the brink, not of technological advancement, but of a spiritual collapse so profound that it threatened the very fabric of creation. The Bible, in Genesis 6, gives us only a glimpse. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. But what does this actually mean? To the ancient reader, sons of God referred to celestial beings, entities that were not bound by the physical limitations of mankind. These weren't mythological characters. To the authors of these texts, they were real, powerful, and terrifyingly active. The lost era of history. Before Noah's Ark, the world was a vastly different place. Historical and biblical traditions suggest a long-lived generation where men and entities walked side by side. This was an era where the boundary between the spiritual and the physical was thin. The environment was lush, teeming with life, and governed by principles we have long forgotten. It was a time when the population grew rapidly, leading to the formation of early, complex societies that were arguably more advanced than what we give them credit for. However, this growth brought moral decay, as humanity began to move away from the path laid out by their Creator. The intrusion of the celestial. The central tension of this era began when these celestial beings, the Watchers, set their eyes upon humanity. This wasn't a romance. It was a transgression. These beings were tasked to watch over humanity, to guide and observe, but they chose to abandon their heavenly dwelling. By taking human wives, they effectively disrupted the natural order of life and death, injecting an unnatural element into the human bloodline. This act is what many scholars refer to as the Great Corruption, a turning point where the world ceased to be ruled by God's order and started being influenced by the agendas of these fallen entities. Enoch, the prophet of a dying age. In the middle of this chaos lived Enoch. He is described in the scriptures not just as a man, but as a man who walked with God. Enoch served as a moral compass in a society that had completely lost its way. His role was not only to witness the wickedness, but to record it, to be the eyes and ears of a generation that would ultimately be erased by the coming judgment. He understood that the presence of these fallen beings was not just a historical event, but a spiritual infection that was poisoning the minds of his contemporaries. This chapter of our journey isn't just about what happened thousands of years ago. It is about the consequence of choosing power over purpose. When we examine the ancient traditions, we find that Enoch's writings serve as a warning that the world, when left to its own devices and influenced by corrupt entities, will always descend into violence and confusion. As we dive deeper into the next chapters, remember this. The flood was not just an act of divine wrath. It was a necessary cleansing of a world that had become an experiment of darkness, the Watchers and the forbidden knowledge. To understand the catastrophic fall of the Antediluvian world, we must look closer at the entities the book of 1 Enoch identifies as the Watchers. These were not mere angels. They were celestial beings, high-ranking watchers tasked by the divine to observe and guide humanity. But according to the ancient texts, they grew obsessed with the beauty of human women, and their descent to earth would change the course of human history forever. The oath at Mount Hermon. When these 200 fallen angels, led by figures like Samiaza and Azazel, descended upon the summit of Mount Hermon, they did something that sealed their fate. They bound themselves by a mutual curse. They swore an oath that they would not turn back, despite knowing the severe consequences of their rebellion against the divine order. This wasn't just a random act. It was a coordinated insurrection against the status quo of the universe, the transmission of forbidden knowledge. When they arrived, they brought with them a level of knowledge that was never intended for mankind. This wasn't simple craftsmanship. It was forbidden knowledge that shattered the natural developmental trajectory of the human race. The introduction of metallurgy and warfare, Azazel taught humanity the art of forging metals, creating swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. Before this, humanity lived in a state of simplicity, but now they had the instruments of war and domination at their fingertips. This fundamentally transformed human society from one of survival to one of conquest, cosmetics, and enchantment. The Watchers introduced the use of antimony, eye makeup, and decorative jewelry. This led to a culture of vanity and manipulation, drawing humanity further away from simplicity and toward greed and superficiality. The sorcery of roots and plants. Perhaps most dangerous was the knowledge of incantations, root cutting, and medicinal plants. They taught humans how to manipulate the natural world through occult practices, essentially opening the door to witchcraft and to control the will of others. The systematic corruption of the human soul. The impact was catastrophic. The earth was filled with violence, as humanity used this advanced, forbidden knowledge to exploit one another rather than live in harmony. The distortion of nature. By introducing these dark arts, the Watchers ensured that the earth would be governed by chaos rather than order. The invasion of the mind. Enoch saw that this was not just an invasion of territory, but a systematic invasion of the human mind. The boundaries between the spiritual and physical realms were being torn down, leaving humanity vulnerable to forces they were never meant to govern. Think about it. Humanity was being re-engineered. Enoch, as a prophet of his time, witnessed this unfolding and wept for the future of man. He recognized that these entities were not merely teaching crafts. They were corrupting the very nature of human existence, turning a world that was meant for peace into a battlefield for the agenda of these fallen celestial beings. The Nephilim, the giants of antiquity, the forbidden knowledge introduced by the Watchers, led to a nightmare that the world had never seen, the birth of the Nephilim. While many modern interpretations try to relegate these beings to the realm of simple folklore, the ancient texts paint a much more visceral and terrifying picture. When the celestial Watchers mingled with the daughters of men, the offspring were not merely large people. They were something altogether different, a hybrid species that defied the natural order of creation. The forbidden knowledge introduced by the Watchers led to a nightmare that the world had never seen, the birth of Nephilim. While many modern interpretations try to relegate these beings to the realm of simple folklore, the ancient texts paint a much more visceral and terrifying picture. When the celestial Watchers mingled with the daughters of men, the offspring were not merely large people. They were something altogether different, a hybrid species that defied the natural order of creation, a reign of terror and consumption. As their numbers grew, the Nephilim began to consume all the acquisitions of mankind. They were not satisfied with the resources of the earth. They turned their sights toward the living. The devouring of humanity When humanity could no longer sustain their gluttonous demands, the giants turned against the humans themselves, treating the population as a source of sustenance. The violence of the hybrid. The earth was filled with violence and bloodshed. They did not just rule, they ravaged. They ate the flesh of men, birds, beasts, and reptiles, and even drank one another's blood. This was a direct mockery of the sanctity of life. The systematic perversion. Their influence didn't stop at physical violence. They were an abomination that corrupted the very DNA and spirit of everything they touched. Their existence was a challenge to the sovereignty of God, a grotesque mockery of life that sought to replace the divine image in man with a twisted, hybrid nature. Why did they exist? Some scholars suggest they were a deliberate attempt by the fallen watchers to pollute the human bloodline, perhaps to prevent the eventual birth of Messiah, or to create a hybrid race that they could control as a private army. They were the men of renown, the heroes of old who, instead of protecting the world, brought it to the brink of total annihilation. The architectural signatures. When we look at the remnants of giant-sized structures in history, the massive megaliths, the cyclopean masonry of ancient ruins, and stones that seem impossible for primitive humans to move, many have wondered if they are, in fact, the architectural signatures left behind by these powerful beings. These were not just cities. They were fortresses of a lost epoch, a time when monsters were not found in nightmares, but walking among men in the light of day. The cry of the earth. The terror caused by the Nephilim was so pervasive that it triggered a cosmic response. The cry of the earth reached the heavens. This was not just a local conflict. It was a global crisis of existence. Humanity was being wiped out not by a natural plague, but by these unnatural entities. Enoch, seeing this from a spiritual perspective, knew that the world had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. The flood was not an act of random destruction. It was a necessary cleansing of a world that had been fundamentally corrupted by these hybrid beings. As we move forward, we must ask ourselves, if such beings once existed, what does that say about the unseen forces that still influence our world today? The Canon debate, the Great Erasure, the exclusion of the Book of Enoch from the Bible is not just a footnote in history. It is one of the most significant erasures in religious archives. To grasp why this happened, we must stop viewing the Bible as a book that fell from the sky in its current form. Instead, we must understand it as a collection of manuscripts curated over centuries, shaped by political necessity, theological shifts, and the struggle for authority within the early church. The historical context, the Qumran connection. When we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the mid-20th century, we find something shocking. The Essenes, a Jewish sect living near Qumran during the time of Jesus, didn't just read Enoch, they treasured it. There are more copies of the Book of Enoch found in Qumran than almost any other book, including some parts of the Old Testament. This proves that for the generation that witnessed the birth of Christianity, Enoch was authoritative. Why, then, was it pushed into the shadows? The theological tensions. As Christianity spread from a small Jewish movement into a massive Roman-influenced organization, the Canon, the list of accepted books, began to tighten. Enoch presented several problems for the emerging orthodoxy, the angelic hierarchy. Enoch provides a detailed, almost encyclopedic list of fallen angels and their functions. Early church leaders feared this would lead to angel worship or Gnosticism, which promoted secret knowledge and hierarchies that threatened the church's central authority. The Messianic vision. Enoch refers to a Son of Man who sits on the throne of glory. While some claim this aligns with the New Testament, other theologians felt it was too speculative and competed with their specific Christological focus. They wanted to maintain control over the definition of the Messiah. The nature of evil. The church wanted to emphasize human choice and divine grace. Enoch's heavy focus on the Watchers as the external, systemic source of human corruption was seen as a potential excuse for human sin. If evil is caused by external entities, does that minimize individual accountability? This was a dangerous theological path. The role of the Apostle Jude. Perhaps the greatest mystery is that Jude, the brother of Jesus, quotes the book of Enoch directly in the New Testament, Jude 1 verses 14 to 15. If the apostles were reading and quoting Enoch, how can it be dismissed as heretical? Some scholars argue that early church councils, such as the Council of Laodicea, actively suppress a text to unify the church under a single, simplified narrative. By removing Enoch, they weren't just removing a book. They were removing the prequel that explained the existence of demons and the spiritual backdrop of the New Testament. Was it protection or suppression? We are left with two perspectives. The first is that the church acted as a shield, protecting the faithful from complex, confusing, and potentially dangerous cosmic myths that could lead people into occultism. The second perspective is more cynical, that the church suppressed a vital piece of the human story to consolidate its own power. By removing Enoch, the church ensured that its interpretations of angels, demons, and the end times were the only ones that remained. The result is that for 1,500 years, the average person knew nothing of the Watchers or the detailed accounts of the giants. We were left with the results, the flood, the struggle of mankind, but lost the reasons, the fallen Watchers, the corruption of DNA, the angelic war. Today, as we recover these texts, we are essentially looking at the missing chapters of our spiritual history. The debate over Enoch is, at its core, a debate over how much truth we are allowed to know about the unseen war that continues to shape our reality. If we study the book of Enoch with an open mind, we begin to see a haunting pattern. This text is not merely a chronicle of the past. It is a prophetic roadmap pointing directly to our future. Enoch wrote that in the last days, the conditions on earth would mirror those that existed before the great flood. As the scripture says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. These are not just cautionary words. They are a blueprint for the end of the age. According to Enoch's prophecies, humanity in the end times is destined to repeat the exact same errors that led to the collapse of the Antediluvian world. Genetic corruption and transhumanism. Today, we stand on the precipice of a new era defined by genetic engineering, biotechnology, and the fusion of man and machine. When humanity tampers with the foundational code of creation, our DNA, are we not walking the same path as those who defied the natural order in the days of the Watchers? The normalization of the occult. We live in an age where witchcraft, spiritualism, and ancient occult symbols are mainstreamed through media and technology. What was once recognized as forbidden knowledge is now packaged as entertainment, desensitizing the public to forces that Enoch warned were fundamentally dangerous. Gemini said, "Here is a chapter 5. The End Times and the Return of the Watchers in English, expanded to match the depth and length of your documentary. Chapter 5. The End Times and the Return of the Watchers, expanded. Background music. Starts with a low, intense sub-bass frequency, incorporating futuristic digital glitches and an escalating sense of urgency. If we study the book of Enoch with an open mind, we begin to see a haunting pattern. This text is not merely a chronicle of the past. It is a prophetic roadmap pointing directly to our future. Enoch wrote that in the last days, the conditions on earth would mirror those that existed before the great flood. As the scripture says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. These are not just cautionary words. They are a blueprint for the end of the age. 1. The cycle of history, repeating the past. According to Enoch's prophecies, humanity in the end times is destined to repeat the exact same errors that led to the collapse of the Antediluvian world. Genetic corruption and transhumanism. Today, we stand on the precipice of a new era defined by genetic engineering, biotechnology, and the fusion of man and machine. When humanity tampers with the foundational code of creation, our DNA, are we not walking the same path as those who defied the natural order in the days of the Watchers? The normalization of the occult. We live in an age where witchcraft, spiritualism, and ancient occult symbols are mainstreamed through media and technology. What was once recognized as forbidden knowledge is now packaged as entertainment, desensitizing the public to forces that Enoch warned were fundamentally dangerous. 2. The Return of the Watchers. A question that haunts theologians and researchers is, are these entities still active? The invisible war. Enoch teaches us that world events are not merely dictated by politics or economics. They are the outward symptoms of an invisible war. Many believe that the ancient forces that corrupted humanity in the beginning never left. They simply shifted their tactics to influence the digital and psychological landscapes of our modern world. The two witnesses. In the book of Revelation, chapter 11, we are told of two witnesses who will appear in the end times to testify against the corruption of the world. Because Enoch walked with God and was taken without seeing death, ancient traditions often identify him as one of these two figures. This is a theory that bridges the Old Testament mystery with the New Testament prophecy. In our era of AI, digital manipulation, and global confusion, why has the message of Enoch become so urgent? Spiritual discernment. We live in a world of deepfakes and synthetic realities. Enoch's legacy is a call to sharpen our spiritual discernment, the ability to distinguish between absolute truth and high-level deception. The call to vigilance. The life of Enoch is a masterclass in resistance. He did not succumb to the moral decay of his peers. He chose to walk a lonely path of integrity. Today, as the world drifts toward unprecedented distraction, the lesson is clear. Stay awake. Stay alert. The climax of Enoch's visions describes the great judgment. He details a moment where the veil between the physical and spiritual realms is stripped away, and every soul, as well as the fallen entities, must face the ultimate accountability. This is not a message of despair. It is a message of ultimate justice. If Enoch could foresee the architecture of the end times thousands of years ago, it confirms that history is not a random accident. It is following a plan that remains under the ultimate sovereignty of the Creator. This knowledge should not paralyze us with fear, but rather embolden us with purpose. We are not just living in the aftermath of history. We are living to the final chapters of a long-standing spiritual conflict. As we conclude this journey, we find ourselves standing in a position not unlike the one Enoch occupied thousands of years ago. We are living in a generation that has unlocked the building blocks of life, yet we seem to have lost the moral compass required to steward them. The story of Enoch is not a relic of a dead, dusty past. It is a mirror reflecting our own modern reality. We must confront the uncomfortable parallel. We are witnessing the reemergence of the forbidden knowledge that Enoch wept over. In 2026, we are pushing the boundaries of what it means to be human. Through rapid advancements in AI, neural interfaces, and the genetic modification of the human genome, we are stepping into a territory that the ancients warned us would invite the watchers back into the human experience, the loss of the human essence. Just as the Nephilim were a perversion of the natural order, our current race toward transhumanism threatens to dilute the very image of the Creator within us. The digital Tower of Babel. We are building a global, interconnected consciousness, a digital Tower of Babel, believing we can reach the heavens through data and silicon, forgetting that the foundation of truth is not found in algorithms, but in the spiritual realm. Enoch's ultimate legacy is his discernment. He saw the corruption, he documented the darkness, but he did not participate in it. He walked with God in a world that had forgotten how to pray. For you, the viewer, the call to action is simple but profound. Seek the original source. Stop relying on curated, filtered versions of history and truth, like the scholars who rediscovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. Go back to the source. The truth is often buried beneath layers of institutional suppression. Cultivate spiritual awareness. Do not be lulled into a state of spiritual apathy by modern media. Understand that your attention is the most valuable commodity in a world dominated by unseen influences. The light of integrity. Enoch was a light in the dark because he was unchanging. In an era of shifting identities and fluid morality, being a person of absolute principle is the most revolutionary act you can commit. We end with a prophecy that is echoed for millennia. Behold, he comes with 10,000s of his saints. Whether you view Enoch's return as a literal event or a symbolic return of the principles he stood for, the message remains the same. The cycle of chaos will not go on forever. There is an end to the experiment of darkness. There is a final accounting. The story of Enoch teaches us that even when the world seems to have completely surrendered to the watchers and their agendas, there is a remnant that remains connected to the divine. You are now a part of that chain of transmission. You know the history that was meant to be forgotten. You understand the unseen forces that have shaped the shadows of our world. As you turn off the screen and return to your life, carry this truth with you. The history of man is not just what we see, but what we choose to believe. Walk with God, seek the truth, and never fear the dark. For the light that Enoch followed is still the only light that can guide us through the end of the age.